It's 1946, and the war is finally over. But while peace has come to most of the world, in one German courtroom, it's just beginning. Over the course of the next 2 years, that courtroom will be packed with the biggest names in the Third Reich. Men like Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess, who have been running Germany for the past 12 years. They and many others are there because they've been charged with crimes against humanity. And while this might sound like a bit of a sensationalist headline, it really isn't. It's not some overdramatic way of describing what happened. It's literally what they were charged with. The series of trials held in Nuremberg between 1945 and 1949 are often referred to as the Nuremberg trials, even though only the first of them ever took place in Nuremberg. The subsequent ones were held in nearby Landstuhl. But I guess they didn't want to change the name once they'd come up with it. Anyway, these trials were the first time that individuals had ever been held accountable by an international court for crimes that they committed while working for their government. This was unprecedented territory, and so there was no set procedure for these trials, meaning that those who organized them kind of just made it up as they went along. This led to a number of bizarre situations. But perhaps the strangest of all was the fact that the defendants would often find themselves living it up at the guest houses while awaiting trial. As far as prison conditions go, it doesn't really get much better than that. These guest houses, which were located outside the city, often featured spacious rooms, servants, and beautiful gardens. Not exactly the kind of place you'd expect someone awaiting trial for war crimes to stay. In fact, the accommodations were so comfortable that people staying there actually started complaining about them. You could take Gustav, for example, who decided to move into the guest house of Villa Tannenau. There he enjoyed a spacious bedroom, a large living room and a dining room complete with a table setting fit for a king. He also had access to a full kitchen and even a garden. That was until he complained that the other guests were smoking too much and that the food wasn't to his liking. He was told in no uncertain terms to adjust or move out. While many of the defendants chose to accept the luxury conditions laid out before them, others saw right through them. Take Alfred Jodl, for example, who refused to stay in his lavish guest house, opting instead to stay in actual prison. He felt that accepting the comforts of the guest house would make him appear unrepentant, and he wanted to make it clear that he was sorry for his actions during the war. His decision may have been a noble one, but it certainly wasn't comfortable. His prison cell was located in the basement of the nearby Landschulze Palace and featured a bare concrete bed, a small sink, and a toilet. It wasn't exactly the Ritz, but it was still more comfortable than what most prisoners had to endure. But what about those who weren't Nazi party members? What kind of treatment did they receive? Well, it all depended on who they were and what they were accused of. For example, there was Victor Breck, who worked as an SS officer at Auschwitz. He was given a life sentence, but as he was already 50 years old, this basically meant that he wouldn't be seeing the outside world again. Unlike the high-ranking officials, he wasn't offered the option of living in a guest house, but he wasn't tortured or mistreated either. In fact, he was allowed to live relatively comfortably at the prison in Landschulze, where he spent most of his days reading books and playing checkers. He was given extra privileges because he was seen as a low-ranking cog in the Nazi machine, and they needed him to testify in upcoming trials. The same couldn't be said for those who weren't offered such leniency, like Franz von Papen, who served as Hitler's deputy during the war. His situation was much more dire. He had tried to assassinate Hitler on numerous occasions, and if he had succeeded, he would have taken the #1 spot on the list of people that the Allies wanted to prosecute. As it was, however, he was arrested by the British and sent to Nuremberg to stand trial. But that didn't mean that he was safe. After the trial began, he became one of the main targets of the prosecution and was quickly found guilty of war crimes. As punishment, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison and sent to the infamous Spandau prison in Berlin. He wasn't supposed to go there, really. See, that prison had been reserved for the top brass of the Nazi Party, and they didn't want to put him in with them. But when they realized that he'd have nowhere else to go, they broke the rules. and stuck him there anyway. For 7 years, von Papen lived under the watchful eyes of the Allied guards who patrolled the halls day and night. They were determined to prevent the former Deputy Führer from getting his hands on any weapons or, just killing everyone in sight. Von Papen was forbidden from speaking German and was forced to sleep in a windowless basement room. It was hardly the kind of luxurious treatment that the higher UPS received, but it was still much more comfortable than what most people had to endure. Speaking of the higher UPS, though, how did they fare? Well, the answer depends on which one you ask. Some, like Hermann Göring, were treated very well indeed. After being arrested by the Americans, he was whisked away to a mansion in the countryside where he lazed about all day, drinking fine wine and eating gourmet food. He was free to roam the grounds and even had his own private chef. He didn't spend all his time gallivanting around the estate, though. He was required to attend hearings in Nuremberg from time to time, and when he did, he was driven there in a Cadillac. If that sounds extravagant, though, it was nothing compared to what another defendant got. Enter Robert Ley, head of the German Labor Front, who was in charge of overseeing the slave labor program that fueled the German war machine. He was offered the same luxuries as Göring, but with one key difference. He was allowed to keep all the money he made while working for the Nazi Party. With that kind of cash, he was able to buy a whole lot of luxuries, including a yacht. That's right. He was able to purchase a yacht while on trial for war crimes. That yacht, appropriately named the SS Justice, cost him nearly $500,000, but it was well worth the price. Every morning he would leave his luxurious accommodations and board the vessel, then sail around the French countryside. He wasn't allowed to leave European waters, but that didn't stop him from having fun. Those who saw him on his travels might have struggled to believe that he was awaiting trial for overseeing the killings of more than 3 million people. But it wasn't all fun and games for Ley. As the War Crimes Tribunal dragged on, he started to feel the heat. Eventually, he reached a breaking point, grabbed a pistol and shot himself in the mouth. Fortunately for him, the wound wasn't fatal, but it did end his time on Earth as we knew it. From that day forward, he was unable to speak properly and drooled constantly. In the end, it was much more comfortable for him to simply end his own life rather than live like that. Ultimately, the Nuremberg trials were a landmark moment in human history. For the first time, people were held accountable for the crimes they committed during wartime, regardless of whether or not they were acting under orders. The trials were far from perfect, but they established important precedents that have since been built upon. They also brought some measure of justice to the victims of Nazi Germany, and for that, they will always be remembered.